Poor people of Reddit who have dated rich people. How different were their lives compared to yours? So, she was a full-time professional fine artist, oil painter. Dad was a pioneer in green energy. Whole family is loaded as a result. She was able to focus on school, earn her MFA, travel the world on residencies, etc. She was wonderful and goes to show that when you have a well-adjusted upbringing, support, and the money to provide resources, you can be who you were born to be. Absolutely could not relate to the socioeconomic struggles of the people she dated, though. Next story. I grew up very blue-collar poor. The men I knew fixed cars, re-roofed their own houses, knew plumbing and electrical stuff, etc. My husband grew up very wealthy. His family had a massive house, a pool, a vacation home in Spain, and maids. Honestly, the contrast was stark. The first thing he did after we moved in together was put liquid dish soap in the dishwasher. He didn't know anything. He didn't know the vacuum needed to be emptied. It could have been a deal breaker, but he fully embraced his ignorance, and he learned. It was a whole new world, and he loved it. One of my favorite memories is of putting up our first Christmas tree. He'd never been a part of that and got so much joy from it. Next story. Had a girlfriend in high school. We dated until sophomore year of college. What baffled me wasn't her disregard for the cost of things, but the fact that she couldn't understand why I couldn't just pick up and take her out for nice dinners or buy her $400 Louis Vuitton sneakers that she wanted for Christmas, especially since she was willing to buy me $250 Jordans, which I declined. She was such a sweet girl but had no concept of other people coming from poor families. No idea how I had no money despite being 16 and 17, not having a job. When I got my first minimum wage job at 18, I spent pretty much everything I had on her for several years. She also took me out and bought me nice gifts, but she never had a job. She had a $300 a week allowance from her dad, but would ask him for money whenever she wanted anything. So she wouldn't even spend her own allowance on anything. She had like $9,000 in her bank account by the time we were 18, and I had $200 to my name. Again, very nice girl, gorgeous, she was very good to me, but I eventually lost interest because of reasons that had nothing to do with money. Next story. Dated the daughter of a wealthy member of parliament for my country's Conservative Party. During dinner discussions at their home, it really hammered it home how little her mother, the MP, understood about the daily reality of being poor. Next story. The family was an entity in itself and had rules. Relationships are everything. The family itself is a thing. The club, the party, the vacations, the homes, the cars, the business, it's all about the family, the patriarch, the traditions, the schools, the business partners, and the neighborhood and the club. And it's not a bad thing, it's just different. I was raised to be independent and get the F out of my parents' house. They stuck together like glue. Everyone has a role to play, but they have security and they belong. Me, I never belonged anywhere. I was raised by people who had kids because that's what you were supposed to do. And then I got the F out of their house when I turned 18, and that was that. Next story. My ex was a poor sod, but his family I got to know was buttered. I also got to know he was basically leeching off of them, which led to the strange arrangement of him not earning nearly as much money as he expected of anyone else like me. He would constantly talk crap about the way I lived an ordinary life. My furniture was crap, my clothes were cheap, and my gifts were never good enough. How did I not buy my food at the gourmet store anyway? According to him, I didn't know how to cook either, because how could you make real Italian pasta without the real Italian recipe? Recipes that his parents brought from all of their luxury travels all over the world, and none that came from him. His cooking crap was made even more hilarious by the fact that this dude couldn't even cook a simple dish on his own, but his brother was a chef. So whenever he needed instructions, which was always, he would call his brother. I left him soon because his attitude was utterly insufferable. What I learned is that it's okay if you're rich. You're still dateable as long as you're not an asshat. Next story. So I wouldn't say I was poor, more average, but the two wealthy women I dated were both quite spoiled. They expected to get their way, and what was interesting for me was that they both expected their money to open doors and solve problems rather than using courtesy or charm. My ex-best friend was the same way. What was very noticeable for her especially was the smallest thing was a crisis. People who have never dealt with true pain or loss because they've always been shielded from it are upset by small things. Okay, so really quick, every story we've read so far has been OP knew this one person, dated this one person, except for the person in this story, who knew 3 different rich individuals. Where are they hanging out? At the golf club, just waving their ass around? I don't know, but I'll do it. I don't care. I'll deal with a spoiled brat for a couple of months. I don't mind as long as we get to go somewhere or we get tickets to events. Anyway, next story. That in the majority of cases, all is fine until you meet the family and friends. You sit there like an idiot, unable to relate to anything what they say, and once you think some familiar topic appears, it ends up with a discussion about 10K baby strollers, wines, or childhood memories about skiing in Switzerland or taking a trip to a seaside with their first Porsche. Their friends' interests were mostly things outside my tax brackets. Couldn't even relate to typical girly discussions about makeup and clothing because their talks were about picking Birkin over Chanel, not about cute Zara top. Then problems start also when it comes to buying a gift because there is no way you can match the amount of what they want to buy you. And any kind of decision involving finances when you want to go 50-50. And then there's the holiday which your partner picked, which is like 5 salaries. A lot of people make it work. I tried 2 different times and each time I fell out of place very quickly. Next story. When I was 26, I was making around 20K as a server. I dated a 32-year-old corporate attorney who was making 300K. I think the biggest thing it showed me is that I was capable of more in my life. For a long time, I thought I was just going to be a server because that's all I could do. She showed me to want more and to strive for more. I'll always be thankful to her for that because she changed the trajectory of my life. I went back to school and I have a different career now. She pushed me to want something different, and it's something I didn't know was possible until I met her. Next story. I grew up in a middle-class home and sometimes really struggled depending on my dad's job status. My wife grew up quite wealthy. Think maids, nanny, vacations all over the world, private school. Our biggest hurdle during the first couple of years of dating was lifestyle issues. Just seeing how much she'd spend without even worrying about the price or budget. Not thinking twice about a purchase or when grocery shopping. It was the small things I was more amazed at and found tacky more anything. If you asked her, she would say I have far more financial literacy than her. She's a hard worker and works long hours, but still has that safety net. We are happily married, but navigating status/class was a huge hurdle in the early stages of our relationship, and sometimes still creeps in. Even now during the holidays, it's noticeably different between how my family does things versus hers. My siblings have great jobs, homes, etc., but still it does not compare to how elaborate and expensive my wife's family does those things. Next story. I've done it twice, once in undergrad and once in vet school. The girl in undergrad kind of felt like she was dating me for the experience. Like, she'd never been to an Aldi before and kind of went overboard on the Aldi finds and was very confused that I went to both Aldi and Myers for my groceries. Her dad absolutely hated me because I wanted to be a vet instead of a real doctor like him. She always asked like weird questions too about growing up not rich, and I'm pretty sure she thought my childhood was like the movie 8 Mile with Eminem. I did grow up in a suburb of Detroit, but very much not 8 Mile. Otherwise, she was pretty chill about most things. She usually paid for stuff if we went on expensive dates, but she also seemed to genuinely enjoy the cheap dates I managed to find. Like, I found a lot of nice trips with my student discounts. Then, the girl in vet school was determined to pretty woman me, or I guess more like the episode of The Simpsons where Lisa tries to make Willie a gentleman. Like, she insisted I come to Whole Foods with her. She had a solo pony and she wanted me to learn about polo and ride horses and stuff. By the way, horses really don't like me. She'd done a lot of studying abroad and seemed almost offended I'd gotten into the program without it. She would buy like fine wines and cheese and then want to see how I reacted to them and seemed surprised when I knew stuff from the museum. It was nice at first to get a bit spoiled, but it got weird. She also had no concept of what was expensive for the rest of us. So she would always want to do really fancy nights out at high-end clubs after exams, and the rest of us would be like, it's $2 beer night at the campus bar, so we're going there. Next story. So I learned that soup could be homemade and didn't just come in tins. In fact, I discovered a whole bunch of foods I'd never previously encountered, such as dates. In general, I realized that outwardly perfect families with loads of money and material security could still be miserable and dysfunctional. A comfort, maybe, and an eye-opener. Edit. For some context for all the folks trying to educate me on soup, when I learned the fact above, I was 15. I was raised by a single working mom who didn't cook much, and to that point, hadn't made soup. She wasn't lazy or ignorant. Next story. Partner born to a wealthy family. Generational subdued wealth. International trips a few times a year. Live-in housekeeper. Best schools. NOLS. Sports and art exposure. Good person. Gave back with volunteering and donations. Contrast, though, could not relate to debt. Fears of homelessness or money anxiety. Biggest contrast, never afraid to try new things or make mistakes. Took a job that didn't work out, that's okay. Family will help you afloat until you find something else. Broke a leg overseas because you took a skiing risk in Italy? No worries, we'll charter something or find a way to get you out. I don't have that kind of freedom. So for anybody who's never heard of NOLS or NOLS like me, it stands for National Outdoor Leadership School, which is dedicated to teaching wilderness skills and leadership that benefit both people and the environment. So yeah, rich people stuff. Anyway, next story. So I've dated a couple. I grew up adjacent to wealth, and first off, they were lovely people, caring and thoughtful, but the truth is they were simply unable to understand poor. What I realized was that the struggle to afford things binds people together, and working towards a common goal, say a trip or a more expensive item, is a reward that couples can share together. We did it, they'll say. I also realized just how much the subject of money comes up in any relationship, and if you aren't in the same boat financially, it's alienating for both of you. Hard to get past that in most situations. Next story. I've always dated guys who had their education paid for by their parents. Either mom and dad paid 100% of their education and rent in full, or didn't help pay rent but would send money over every once in a while and would be there for emergencies. I just can't relate because my parents, despite doing well financially, would even grumble if I asked for 100 euros cash for birthdays so I could buy a secondhand washing machine. They would say something like, "Don't expect a birthday gift next year." I never expected them to pay for my education. I never expected them to pay for rent, utilities, or groceries or anything. I paid for everything myself, which is absolutely fine. But sometimes I'll remember something and tell my partner and he'll be like, "WTF?" Like the time I had 15 cents and bought spaghetti without meat, veggies, or sauce, and ate it like that because I was so hungry. And his immediate answer is, "Didn't your parents help pay for rent and groceries and education?" And I'm just like, no. Next story. Always have a way out. People with money know it's a tool to control people and will use it. If you find you're staying because you've been trapped without ability to financially survive, well, no bueno. When we would vacation, I would get threatened with abandonment in another place that I couldn't leave, so I'd have to comply. Dinner on him and we argued at the restaurant? Give in or he will pay only his portion. It was all control. Now I let people treat me but always am able to cover my flight back. Don't pay for me to control me. And I knew that it would get worse with kids and being married. You're at a rich person's whim if you put total trust in them for care. Next story. I'm not poor, but came from a working-class average family, and I do very well for myself now. Around 30, I dated a girl who I knew was rich when she told me to pick her up at her parents', and when I googled the address, the place had a gate to get in. She worked an honest teacher job and was very humble, kind, and grounded. I did notice small things like for her birthday, she said she was going to buy herself $1,200 sandals. Ain't no teacher buying those. But things fizzled out after a few dates. But I always wonder how/if people could date with such disparity in family socioeconomic classes. Found out afterwards, her family is worth like $500 million. I have never heard anybody before refer to $1 billion as a billy, and I think I will be adding that to my lexicon from now on. Anyway, next story. So I grew up upper middle class, two lefty help people out lawyers for parents, so not poor by any means, but I was engaged to a woman whose father was a partner at one of the US's top 5 law firms. His retirement income is more than my parents' combined working incomes. I learned that they used money to attempt to solve all of their problems in life, especially interpersonal ones. I learned that even at that level of wealth, Americans still teach their kids, "We're poor." I learned that the social pressures that all of those people live with are effing nuts, and as a result, they and their social circles are infinitely more competitive and judgmental of each other than anyone I grew up around. She was spoiled AF, having grown up watching her mom scream at her dad anytime she was upset, and then seeing her dad spending money on her mom to placate her. She expected that in our relationship, and I, as a broke grad student, obviously could not provide that. But nor would I have wanted to, even if I could have. Next story. So, I'm about to get married to one. For reference, her parents just spent $400,000 cash renovating their porch. My parents live in a secondhand mobile home. There is a huge difference. First of all, my future in-laws are all well known in their community for being kind, charitable, and generous. And my fiance is the same way. They are level-headed, in my honest opinion. When we first started dating, she asked me what I wanted for Christmas, and I said some new clothes would be nice, since mine had holes in them and they were old. And she said to me, "Well, I'm gonna buy those for you anyways. That's not a gift.
I mean a real gift.
And she spent thousands giving me new clothes in the first 6 months. Some expensive, some just regular everyday stuff from Old Navy, but she literally bought me an entirely new wardrobe, then gave me a small $500 gift for Christmas, and her parents bought me an $800 gift. Not to mention the fact that she gave me a pair of Beats and a practically new iPhone because she didn't use them anyway. This was obviously mind-blowing to me. I bought her a $150 gift, but she was thrilled with it because it was thoughtful. A nice lighted jewelry cabinet instead of her keeping all of her jewelry in various small wooden boxes that were all unorganized. I will say that for our wedding, she about had a meltdown when she found out our budget was only $50,000, not including the welcome party, the wedding planner, our honeymoon, which is probably an additional $15K. It only lasted for one day before she accepted it and moved on, leaving any animosity behind, which I was really proud of for her. Overall, her or her family never judged me or mine, probably because they haven't always had money. The biggest difference I noticed is that her family bargains for everything. They do trade deals with other companies, call in favors, negotiate everything, wait until stuff is on sale, buy quality, buy it for life stuff, etc. Probably what made her dad such a successful businessman, and lets them stay rich. Next story. So, I dated the guy whose sister is Russian pop star and dad is Russian politician, and he asked me to pick him up because his car was being delivered from overseas. I'm like, whatever, you don't have a car, I'll drive. But sure enough, the next day, he picks me up in his brand new, with plastic still on it, BMW 750i. I lost my purse at a club one time, and he had the whole place turn the lights on and find it. He took me to dinner every night and never let me pay for anything. He didn't go home for Christmas, and I was too embarrassed of where I came from to ask him to come home and meet mine. That was a wild time. Next story. My wife, before we met, went out with a rich guy on a first date. Instead of inviting her to his house, he invited her to a lavish vacation. She was like, I have work on Monday, and considered him a creep. Another ex of my wife sold a company to Microsoft and got a lot of money. He rolled up with a Jaguar thinking he would impress her. Now, she knows nothing about cars, so she said something like, "You got a new Hyundai?" And it wasn't a joke. She literally thought he bought a Hyundai. So whenever I see a Jaguar with my wife, we point out and say, "Look, babe, it's a Hyundai." And then an ex of mine lives in Canada now and went on a date with an NHL hockey player, which I guess is the equivalent of having dated Jesus or something over there. Anyway, she was a little happy but annoyed that she appeared in a newspaper, back when newspapers were a thing. Next story. So, can I do the opposite? I am relatively well off and dated people that grew up poor. The biggest takeaway that's really unfortunate is she conflated love with finances. She would perpetually try to show people she loved them by spending money on them. She would miss rent payments because she was trying to help friends who were behind on their rent payments. She would buy people gifts that she couldn't afford. She would get upset with me for not spending as much as her on gifts to her because even I couldn't realistically justify the amount she would spend. It was really sad, honestly. She tried so hard to help everyone around her and was convinced that was the way to show love. But ultimately, it was destroying her life and made it so she would permanently stay poor, taking on credit card debt because I love you. It was self-destructive. Next story. 1987. I was the revenge on her dad. She brought my punk rock ass to Christmas in Palm Springs. We effed in the hot tub so loud I thought we'd get arrested. The next morning, I was shocked to find a present under the tree from her mom and dad. I was initially shamed and embarrassed. Then I opened it. It was a biography of Ronald Reagan. Then on the flight home, inside the book was an envelope with $1,000 cash. Touche, old man. Touche. Next story. Growing up where I'm from, it's rare for me to think of any girls that weren't wealthy. Our family, on the other hand, was lower middle class. One girl I've dated who also had the worst mental health issues was the most well-off in her family. Her dad paid for a brand new car in cash, Chevy Equinox, paid for her college in full, and paid her rent in full and covered all living expenses when I met her. I, on the other hand, have paid myself for everything I owned and the education I have. She didn't understand or couldn't estimate the cost of living. I can remember when I asked her, "How much do you think I make a week?" and she said $20,000? I'm 23, by the way. I was 21 then. I just felt this massive sense of not being enough for her. I hope every day I might be able to find a girl who is just happy to be with me and doesn't care about what I have. Until then, I will feel lonely. Next story. My wife's parents were loaded. She went to a posh private school, etc. I learned lots about how many resources fancy schools have compared to the state ones. The most hilarious thing I remember was that for my final design and technology project, I built a clock, which was basically some bits of MDF with a couple of quid clock mechanisms attached. My wife, she built like an effing hovercraft, like one she could race around a field. The biggest impact on her now is that she struggles a bit with budgeting and saving, because it wasn't really a thing while she was growing up. If she wanted something, she could just have it. Okay, I'd like to point one thing out about this story. He said, quote, "She went to a posh private school, etc." He gave one example and then hit us with etc. He didn't even get to two. I wish I was that bold back when in English class. Anyway, next story. My first love was from a super rich family. She's a very kind, sweet, and thoughtful person. She was never a jerk to anyone. She's very humble, polite, definitely respectful. She's what you'd call high class in terms of personality and behavior. She's not like how Redditors envision rich people. She never really flaunted her wealth, but one time during her family's business party, I think it was Christmas or New Year, Michael Bublé performed for them. Next story. I dated an adopted girl whose father was a wealthy partner in an industrial electric company. He was a millionaire, easily in the tens of millions, but a very, very modest and good man and very frugal. They had a modest home and lived modestly. I only found out about his wealth from eavesdropping on a phone conversation where he was planning to set up the electrical system for a building. This building ended up being a nearly billion-dollar skyscraper in the works. Because he came from poverty, he knew the value of money. Even though he'd give his daughter pretty much anything she wanted, though she never struck me as spoiled, he would hesitate when he bought something expensive for himself, unless it was work-related, in which case money was no object. He'd just write off the expense. Next story. So I'm not poor, I do pretty well, but I dated the daughter of a billionaire. Old money. We had some big picture incompatibilities that wasn't anybody's fault, but it meant we couldn't go very far. But she was a great person, one of the most honest, honorable, kindest, not just people I've dated, but people I've met. She was surprisingly normal. She wasn't flashy, didn't go for a lot of high-ticket price items, paid attention to what things costed, and did not do hugely extravagant things, made good investments, and actively monitored them. She had a very good head on her shoulders. So I guess what I learned is that they're just people like the rest of us. Next story. She was an heir to a gigantic, publicly traded company. She never makes big purchases with her own money. Think houses, new cars, work vehicles for her ranch, massive renovation projects, etc. She borrows money against her portfolio for everything. The interest rate she pays on the loan is significantly less than the returns on her stocks. She either eventually pays off the loan with her income from her job, or if it's an appreciating asset, she either sells the asset for a huge amount and usually tax-free profit, then pays the loan off, or borrows against the asset since it's technically paid in full to buy more assets. Rinse and repeat forever. Next story. Dated a very rich girl who had even richer friends. They really had no life skills because everything that was even slightly labor-intensive was done by her staff. She didn't know how to make eggs. She didn't know how to do laundry. She had never gone grocery shopping. She had never used a vacuum. She didn't know how to do the dishes, etc. She was completely blown away when she would visit my house and see the sheer amount of labor that went into maintaining a family household. Groceries, cleaning, cooking, laundry, walking dogs, taking the bus, etc. I did appreciate the way that she was very unabashedly aware that she was pampered and sheltered. At no point did she try to downplay it or act like she was something she wasn't. But I don't think she truly felt bad about it until she visited my house. Next story. We are middle class. I dated a generational wealthy dude in the past. Let's say I bankrolled us the first 2 years, dating, going out, eating, grocery, gifts for him, and gadgets. Everything was done by my salary that was 100 times lower than him. I didn't want to be called a gold digger because that's what people around him assumed. I was keeping us entertained and floated. He appreciated me in the start, but I realized massive advantages he had over me, always looming over my head. Like he is doing me a favor, or I'm a pity case, etc. Everything became extremely toxic. He started to use my financial independence against me. He wouldn't pay for anything, and if I asked for his share, apparently I'm after his money or I'm proving people right by not paying for him. It was bad, a real bad relationship. We broke up after a lot of drama, and when I left it was because I was after his money, he said. And when he didn't provide, I dumped him, according to his friends. Next story. My ex wasn't crazy rich, but her family was well beyond comfortable. We graduated college together, and she went about 2 years just doing nothing because, well, she could. She could have gone a lot longer, but refrained because her dad was already starting to get testy. She was very down to earth and practical. The only real noticeable thing was her not working and still buying everything that she wanted. Again, it wasn't wild, she wasn't crazy with it, but the thing she really wanted, she got with no delay. We wanted to move into a pretty nice apartment complex that our friends lived in. While we were meeting with the super the first time, she was fixing to reject us because I was the only one with a job and it didn't pay that much. We told her we both had savings and could realistically stay for several years even in the worst case scenario, but that didn't budge her until my ex pulled her bank statement out of her purse and handed it to the lady. The literal next thing out of her mouth was, "So, when were you looking to move in?" Next story. So I dated a girl. She was a nurse and her dad was an HP CTO. She never had any problems with money because new car, dad, new TV or washing machine, dad. She didn't understand being a nurse usually wouldn't grant her all of that. Vacations in Aspen or Switzerland and whatnot. When I told her I most certainly can't give her that life, she dumped me. Next story. Gifts all the time. Like, hey, it's Wednesday, here's a box of chocolates. Here's a $300 watch for no reason. Also, we were never really dating. I was just allowed to be there for a few years, I guess. I wasn't allowed to talk or speak directly to the parents she lived around, so I would just shut down like some robot and her parents wouldn't even notice me, and that was perfectly acceptable. I was forbidden to ever leave her side of the estate, multi-house complex. She resided in a 2-story building with her bedroom decked out with elaborate stuffed animals on the bed and velvet on almost everything, the kitchen, patio, garden area, with stained glass windows, a 2-car garage that she never drove, 3 bathrooms, and a few other rooms we never even went into because she was afraid of going into them. She was superstitious and would say she believed in ghosts and had OCD. She was a crazy town and I was young. I'm relieved she broke up with me over 20 years ago. She was super vicious when she was mad, often, and would break things, expensive things, and throw tantrums. Things could have ended badly if young me had stuck it out. A few years later, her parents sent me an invitation in the mail to an expensive golf party, wedding, cruise, soiree. I truly don't think her parents even know I existed, ever. So it was her trying to make me feel sad, I guess. Anyway, not even a year later after that, I learned she murdered her husband while he slept. He dated her before and then married her after me, by the way. So she lives in prison now for murder. P.S. She was gifted by her parents a small expensive dog one time for her birthday while we were dating. I had to watch her mistreat that dog. She would force it to dress up in silly clothes or expensive purses, and if that dog ever did anything wrong, she would pick it up and throw it, sometimes against other things. I'm still disturbed and shocked by seeing her do that to a small defenseless animal to this day. Okay, so she picked up the little doggy and then threw it against a wall, like just smashed it like Hulk did the Loki, and you didn't think about making some phone calls? I'm not trying to be super judgy because we were young and naive, and I'm sure times were different 20 years ago, but beating a dog is still beating a dog in any era, but what do I know? Anyway, next story. So, it's easy to hate on rich people, and it's deserved to an extent, but I want to point out that there are a lot of people, both rich and poor, who haven't extracted any meaning from their life experiences. Bad things can happen to you, and you take the wrong lesson away from that makes dating a misery for the next in line. My experiences have taught me that wealth can definitely be a factor, but is rarely the main factor in a relationship not working out. There are lots of people who just aren't good people, regardless of wealth status, or conversely, are amazing human beings. But yeah, no one is perfect, money or not, no matter how many times you swipe on the app. I think one problem is it's expected by many, even subconsciously, that rich people will be smarter than poor people because we bend the knee to wealth in the United States. We worship money. So it's disappointing if someone doesn't live up to the higher expectations. Next story. We were both 20, and although she wasn't rich on her own, her family certainly was. We'd been together for quite some time before I went and actually visited their home. It was massive, and they had so many nice things that caught me off guard. To be honest, it was one of those things that semi-ruined our relationship. I'd hear them complain about money and things they couldn't get, and then they'd say, "I'm just gonna ask my dad." Meanwhile, I was struggling to pay rent while doing manual labor for 12 hours a day. I don't know if it was just me, but I wish there would have been some sort of warning about their status. Showing up to their house blind like that was a little too much. Next story. I was in my 20s saving up for college when one of my good friends set me up with someone. We ended up dating for almost a year. She was ridiculous levels of rich. I'm not sure how much, but we visited her family twice, and each house, yep, different ones, were these movie-type mansions with like 10 bedrooms, butlers, security gates, exotic cars, bowling rooms, the works. Her father was some oil mogul and had his marriage arranged by his parents. Her mother is Indian, and if I recall, her parents had some ties to some Indian state council of ministers. The contrast was pretty intense. Our schedules were just wildly different. At the time, I worked 2 jobs, also tried to prep for school, studying up, bills to pay, etc. She didn't work and wanted to spend a lot of time together, but she would then get frustrated with me having to work. She would constantly wonder why I was doing this, suggested I don't need to go to work or to go to school. It's like she never understood why I wanted to be educated after I told her about our family history. As one might expect, the different lifestyles were just not compatible, and after a rough Thanksgiving, I broke it off. It ended up good because after dating her, my friend that set her up confessed her feelings for me, and we ended up together. Been that way for almost 16 years now. Next story. 2 totally different experiences. The first was, wow, so out of touch. They despised growing up with money, so for the entirety of our relationship, they basically played poor with me. Sleeping in my car, doing crappy jobs, but it was never real because every time they ran out of money, their parents would just give them more. They still live that way to this day. Then, my current partner is a bit different. She doesn't resent the money and actually uses it to keep us afloat. It's nice not having to worry about as much about how I'll make my bills by myself. I have my own expenses she wants to help with, but I want a semblance of independence. Her family is a lot kinder too. Next story. In my PhD, I dated the daughter of a very rich couple. Shortly before we started dating, she developed a disability that prevented her from finishing her studies and severely hindered her career options that would let her keep her standard of living. Unfortunately, she turned into a complete miser. We split most costs, but apparently she was keeping detailed track without telling me or communicating up front that she would prefer to be exacting, and I was apparently one grocery run behind her, and that was the biggest deal of the century. One Christmas, she got me a $60 hoodie, and I got her a $25 book, and that was also a huge effing deal. Next story. So I've got several. This story is about the last one, though. I was a poor kid who got into construction and started earning a decent wage. Dated a classical musician for almost 2 years. At that time, her instrument alone was valued double what I made a year. I met her just after she came back from Europe. She lived there for 5 years learning at some conservatory. She just didn't get it. If I made some extra money from a side job, she wanted us to go on a trip. I wanted to cook a fine meal. She wanted us to go to a fine restaurant. I tried to help her and tried to get her to understand. I really wanted it to work because I loved her, and it was the first relationship where I felt like almost everything clicked. She broke up with me on Christmas a few years ago. Her reason was that she was living her passion and she couldn't be with someone who wasn't living theirs. Never mind that she wouldn't be able to do that without her family money. I had told her my dreams before and my plans, but she deemed them unworthy. One piece of solace I got was that her father called me after the breakup. He basically told me he thought his daughter was an idiot. Looking back, I miss her family more than her now. They are good people, and somehow they seemed more down to earth than her. But after that relationship, I decided I will never date someone in the multi-millions or above tax bracket again. I need someone that knows what it's like to starve, been behind on rent, that had some real-world struggles. So, as I've joked about a few times in this video, I've never dated anybody rich or wealthy, but OP did say one thing in this story that I resonated with, and he said it was the first relationship where he felt like almost everything clicked. And I was there this year. You know, I had something, it was great, almost everything worked out, but there was that one central integral thing that just made it topple over. So I feel that, I get that, I understand what OP is talking about, and it's so sad. Oh my god. Anyway, next story. So, she really thought she was better than everyone around her. Always claimed she worked hard to earn what she had, always complained about not having enough money and how expensive everything was, but had no problem having her then husband buy her $20K plus jewelry. I worked with her. She talked a lot more than she actually did when it came to work. It was her husband who started the business. He was the mastermind and was very humble. She was annoying about spending. She hated it when her employees would have anything nice. At one point, she even refused to have the office have water because it was like $6 per case. She would complain about how expensive instant coffee was and was hoarding it. Well, I was the one buying all of that stuff on my own time with the company credit card. I would buy candy for the office with my own money. When we would go out to dinner, it was always super fancy, and she didn't see the prices then. My biggest annoyance with her, though, was the fact that she always felt like everyone was stealing from her, that the clients were always underpaying, and she was just always a victim, even though everything she ever had was handed to her on a silver platter. Next story. My ex and current girlfriend both come from very wealthy families. I learned that they often fail to understand just how good they have it, that small things I'd find pretty insignificant could really upset them, like a train being late or weather being cold, etc. I find it hard to relate to them sometimes, and I find it hard to accept certain things that they'll say, like how they insist they don't have much money because they're currently unemployed, but they have more money in their savings and trust fund than I've ever had in my entire life. Their knowledge of food is vast, though, but that's because they often prefer expensive ingredients because those are what their parents bought for them growing up, where I would eat happily sausages out of a can. But crucially, wealth doesn't make you an a-hole. Upbringing and the friends they hang out with are way more important factors. Next story. I have dated two multi-millionaires, and it was a wild experience, especially since I was poor AF. I was what they would call a stay-at-home girlfriend. I lived with them, I traveled with them, I kept the house, and I was beautiful, confident, intelligent, and I was a woman on their arm. I wowed their colleagues and friends with my dazzling personality. I could talk to anyone about everything. No, I wasn't a prostitute. The first was a young millionaire who developed some computer thing. I was 21, he was 23. It was one of the best times of my life. We traveled all the time. We also had a place on the beach. I say we with air quotes, and I had a black card and went shopping all the time. The second guy was a millionaire off investments from his family. I was 24, he was 41. He took me out all the time, took me to all of his work functions and out with his friends. We didn't travel as much, but we went out a lot. In both cases, they were surrounded by hanger-ons. Everyone laughed at all of their jokes. They always had a friend nearby, and people would drop everything at their whim. I would bet money that if they told someone around them to lick their a-hole, it would have been done promptly. And as their girlfriend, they expected me to be on at all times. I couldn't have a bad day around them. I learned really quickly that my role was to compliment them, as in to make them look better, not outshine them. I was to make their friends and colleagues/employees jealous by virtue of being beautiful and conversational. My boyfriends would often accomplish this by making a show of their affection. I was basically a doll. I don't want to get into the bedroom/intimate aspect, but let's just say rich people get into some kinky crap. But always knew that it was never a level playing field. I could never be great because they were great. It was a lot of pressure to be this perfect person, and it was easy to fake for a long time. I almost married one of them, but ultimately, I needed to be more important than I was, and I left both of them, one after almost 3 years, one after almost 2, and I was replaced almost immediately both times. Next story. So I come from a lower middle class background, so not exactly super poor, but we definitely couldn't afford most things that others could. Went on a date with a billionaire's daughter once, and it was pretty jarring. I had 2 tickets to a concert and had booked a hotel room in the city to stay the night. Lived about an hour out of the city at the time, matched with her on Tinder and took her. At first it was fine. We met at a bar beforehand, and I learned quickly she was pretty rich. She wasn't shy about flaunting her money. Ended up bringing her to my hotel room that night, and she couldn't believe that hotel rooms were just rooms. Apparently she'd never stayed at a hotel that wasn't a president's suite or something of that kind. She was genuinely asking where the rest of the room was, kitchen, living area, etc. I had to explain to her that hotel rooms were literally just a room for the most part. Then, the next day, I took her to the breakfast buffet that was included, and she couldn't believe that either. She'd never eaten at a buffet. We ended up spending most of the day together, and she seemed really into me. She wanted to see me again the day after. I told her I couldn't because I was employed. She was unemployed, obviously, and I needed to go to work. She told me to quit and hang with her for a while. I told her I had rent to pay, and she also didn't understand that either. She tried really hard to convince me that I didn't need a job because my daddy should pay for my lifestyle. Then she tried to convince me to fly with her on her private jet to go to Coachella on a moment's notice. Again, I declined because I just couldn't take time off to do that. She said that my job and career didn't matter as long as I was dating her. her she'd take care of things for me. She just wanted me to up and quit my job to hang out with her. She genuinely got angry with me that I was prioritizing my career over having fun with her. I guess I learned that rich people don't really care about your life as much as theirs, and genuinely expect you to live your life how it's most convenient for them. Next story. So one of my friends was not poor per se, but not rich either. I'd say she grew up lower middle class. When she was in college, early 90s, she dated a guy who it turned out was from a very high-end wealthy family. She didn't know this at first, and this is how she found out. Let's call him Nate. There was some function they went to where they dressed very nice, like a formal ball or something the college had put on. Afterwards, Nate asked her, "Hey, do you want to come back to my place?" Now, she knew Nate was a member of a fraternity and lived off of campus, so she wasn't really thrilled about it, but Nate assured her that he wasn't taking her to a frat house, but his own small apartment, and she asked if he lived with anyone else, and he said, "No, I live alone. My parents technically own it, but they don't live there," so she agreed. So he drove her to a small driveway near Fraternity Row, but this part of town had some high-end old money buildings. Most were like 3-level brown stones, but in a woodsy area. She asked which floor he lived on, and he said, "The top floor." She assumed that they were in front of a small block of apartments. Nope, a single home. When they came home through the door, a butler asked to take her coat and asked her to remove her shoes. She was shocked, but a bit embarrassed because she had a worn set of flats that were scuffed and a huge hole in her white leggings by the toe. Nate asked, "Don't worry about that. You want a late-night snack or something?" And she agreed. They went into a small dining room, and very quickly the butler and a second person, a maid of sorts, brought in a few stacked trays of canapes, some sweet buns, and tea from a silver tray. Not a lot of food, but very much gourmet food. While she snacked on these random sweet things, the butler and maid stood along the hall, staring off at nothing. Then she whispers to him, "I thought you said you lived alone." "I do." "Then who are they?" "Who?" "Those two." "What, the help? Oh, they don't count. They came with the apartment." And that was the first red flag. But she decided to push on through. She ended up going upstairs with him to his bedroom, which was the entire 3rd floor. They made love, and exhausted, they fell asleep. When she woke up in the morning, she was alone. She noticed that a basket of toiletries had been left on a chair with instructions on how to use the shower. The basket had all she needed: nice soap, brand name toothpaste, a brush, and other stuff like that. She showered, and when she looked for her clothes, which they had tossed on the floor the night before, she saw all of her clothing was neatly folded and could smell that they had been dry cleaned. Her hosiery had been mended. She got dressed and went downstairs to see Nate reading at the dining room table. The help made her breakfast, anything she wanted. She asked Nate, "My clothes were cleaned. Did that mean the butler was in our bedroom while we were asleep? Like naked?" And Nate seemed unconcerned, like he had never considered that. And he said, "I guess." And when she left, she found her shoes had been repaired and her jacket also dry cleaned. She stopped dating the guy, and part of the reason was how flippant he was about the help. He didn't even consider them people. It rubbed her the wrong way. A lot of her friends said she was nuts, but others said, "No, I get it. Real psychopath vibes." Next story. I briefly dated a guy whose father used to work for NBC and General Electric. His dad was smart with investments, and as such, the family is loaded. His dad paid his mortgage once a month, bought him a new car, general rich person stuff. I think he knew about how much stuff cost, but he came off as very spoiled and arrogant because of this. He couldn't understand why I was careful with my money, or why I'd get stressed out with budgeting. We didn't last very long. Well, folks, what did you learn about rich people? Some are crazy, some are nice, and sometimes they kill you, so they're just like poor people. That's the real moral of the story. I do agree with that one story, saying that it's not necessarily the money, it's the people you surround yourself and upbringing. Once again, though, I personally would not object to just experiencing a rich baddie. You know, one of these days, I want to read one of these stories on Really Sparked or Undersparked and say, "Everybody, that's me. We're reading my story, okay?" I've never recognized anybody I know from these stories. Maybe I don't know any Redditors, which I suppose is a good thing. But anyway, guys, thank you all so much for watching. Feel free to comment. Have a really good day. Drink water, and bye-bye.